Joining me now is my friend John Phillips of the great John Phillips Show on KABC Los Angeles, also a columnist with the Southern California News Group. John, I love palace intrigue when it's not my party. I love watching these communists eat each other, and I love the hopeless situation Democrats are in. You have a half-functional old man and a vice president nobody likes.
Oh, yeah. It's like a remake of the West Side Story where you got Biden's bunch against Kamala's crew. And we look at them as being on the same page as Republicans, as conservatives, as outsiders. But in many ways, they're rivals. They're working the same corner. He doesn't look at her as a partner who is working to advance the interests of the administration. He looks at her as someone who's going to try to push him into his grave and sleeps under his bed with an ice pick. And she looks at him as the old man who's in the way. And if Joe Biden would just go away, the White House would be hers. So there's going to be all of this conflict that's just organic that pops up between the two of them. But the fact that she's just so bad at her job makes it unavoidable. And there's no one to blame for this but Joe Biden himself, because Joe Biden, with his Kamala Harris pick, is similar to Mayor Pete, is similar to other picks in the administration. He didn't hire people because of their skill sets. He didn't hire people because they would be able to advance his agenda. He hired them because of the constituencies they represent. And there's nothing in Kamala Harris's portfolio that says that she'd be able to handle the border. There's nothing in her portfolio that says that she would be able to go explain the supply chain crisis and try to come up with solutions. So from her point of view, she's right. She didn't, drop the ball on a subject that she was an expert on. She has no background in any of this stuff. So she's flailing as you should expect her to flail if you're at least halfway familiar with what she's done in her past.
All right. You might be the savviest political analyst I've ever known in my life. So I really want to ask a huge general question of you here, because you brought this up and this popped into my head. You're Joe Biden. You did pick a bunch of people, like you said, either for their gender or they're gay or transgender, a bunch of people for reasons that don't matter, instead of picking capable people who would advance your agenda. In the end, for you, if you're Joe Biden, how was that a net win? Is it a net win? Do picks like that get him elected? I mean, look, maybe I'm looking at this wrong. I would think, forget all that other stuff. I'm going to pick the guy who's going to drive my agenda forward, because success is what's going to get me popular. Am I crazy?
Well, he did it, or he picked Kamala when he was a candidate. So he thought that that would help him get elected. And don't forget, go back to the primaries. Joe Biden was DOA until Jim Clyburn and South Carolina and black voters came in for him in a big way. That's when he promised that the first Supreme Court pick would be a black female as payback for South Carolina coming through. He said that the vice presidential pick would be a woman, and that was always going to be Amy Klobuchar. But then the George Floyd thing happened, and Minneapolis started to burn, and she became toxic. So he couldn't pick the person he wanted to pick. And so they had to scramble. And also in those early primary states, he and Kamala Harris did not get along. I mean, she practically called the man David Duke. So there's no love lost between the two of them, specifically between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But it was a marriage of convenience where he felt at that point he needed to spike black turnout to beat Donald Trump in places like Georgia and North Carolina, Florida, in those swing states that everyone was fighting over. So he felt at that point that the female promise for the vice presidential pick had to be a black female. And if that was the case, there was a very short list of people who he had to consider, and one of them was Kamala Harris. So I don't think he's ever really truly been on Team Kamala, or those two have truly had great admiration for one another, but he just boxed himself into a corner where he had to take the poison pill.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying to me, It did work out. I mean, yeah, now you have a bunch of idiots who don't know what they're doing and your administration's failing, but he did need to pick these people the way he picked them in order to get to the White House. So in the end, it did work.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of what the left believes now. They value diversity over competence. But the problem is you cannot get your agenda through unless you have people who know what they're doing. I mean, you really need to have players who are experts at this to make it happen. This is one of the ways I criticize President Trump, by the way. I thought he made a major mistake. For him, it wasn't diversity and it wasn't equity and it wasn't identity politics. For him, it was nepotism. He put Jared and Ivanka in very sensitive positions, and they hired a bunch of people that tried to prevent him from implementing his vision. If you have the rare opportunity of controlling government and you have a window where you can implement your agenda, you need to pick killers. You need to pick gangsters. You need to pick people who will go in there and do whatever it takes to get your agenda through. If you have people who are there because they're related to you or because they check certain boxes, guess what? You're not getting what you want.
I have a little soundbite of Kamala I'm going to play for you now, and I have a question, John.
Okay.
We must together work together to see where we are headed, where we are going, and our vision for where we should be, but also see it as a moment, yes, to together address the challenges and to work on the opportunities.
John, now I understand politicians, many of them have mastered the art of saying absolutely nothing while acting like they're saying something. So I get it. I wasn't born yesterday. But there's saying nothing, and then there's the things Kamala Harris says, like what you just heard right there. What is the thinking when you're her speechwriter jotting that down? Who's that inspiring? Who's that winning over? Even Democrats, even lunatic communists are listening to that and rolling their eyes saying, what? Who's that winning over?
Yeah, well, she uses a lot of words to say nothing. And clearly, even her own team isn't buying it. I mean, the story that CNN came out with, talking about how unpopular she is in the White House, is that frustration bubbling up to the top. That wasn't Republicans planting a negative story against Kamala Harris. Those were Democrats working for Joe Biden who can't take any more of her. So they're seeing the same thing that you're seeing. They're seeing the same thing that I'm seeing. And they look at her as if she's this massive liability, which of course she is. But they're to blame for putting her in charge of important things. Why would you ever put this woman in charge of the border? Why would you ever try to put her out there to sell your infrastructure plan or to solve the supply chain crisis? They should have known going into it that she was completely incapable of doing that. But right now, what you're seeing happen is in real time, they're discovering what people like you and I have known all along, but they're stuck with her. They can't dump her from the ticket. They can't put her on the Supreme Court to get her out of the way. If you read what her supporters were saying in that article, they're already crying sexism and racism. Well, if the story was planted by Joe Biden and his staff, then who are you referring to as sexist and racist? They're not talking about Republicans. They're talking about Joe Biden and the people who work for Joe Biden. So if you think it's nasty now, you wait until they really start to sideline her. And they really start to give her the duties that vice presidents typically do, which is going to weddings and funerals and meeting with presidents and heads of state who wear sunglasses in the official portrait.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the first on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.